Testing.
I'm driving yesterday.
Okay.
The sun is extra bright today. I'm trying to position so it's not so glary.
Okay, it's 9 o'clock. So we'll start, and I will say hello and welcome everybody. I'll call to order our District of Tofino special council meeting for April 30th at 9 a.m. and recognize that we are conducting our business. Most of us are conducting our business, and the District of Tofino operates in Tla-o-qui-aht territory, but some members of council are joining us from Coast Salish territory on the other side of the island. And I will also note that the meeting is being recorded today, and it will be posted later to the district's YouTube channel. And welcome to the people who are watching the council meeting. It's good to have you here. So could I please have first a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Chalmers. Seconded by Councillor McQuaid. All in favor? We can, great. Anyone opposed? Motion carried. And then we go straight over to Nyla.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'll just take a moment here to share my screen to bring up the presentation. Okay, good morning, Mayor and Council. Please let me know if you don't hear me or if there's too much background noise at any time throughout the presentation. I've chosen today not to wear headphones, but it should be fairly quiet in here today. So I'll just start with a brief overview of what we will cover today. I'm going to provide an update on the financial planning process, and the last budget meeting we had was on January 31st, and there have been significant changes since we presented that budget and went out to consultation. So I'll spend quite a bit of time talking about what has happened since January and today's budget meeting. I'll go over in detail the 2020 budget summary, and then talk in detail about all 5 years of property taxation. So as I mentioned, the last special budget meeting was on January 31st. And since that time, we have had significant impact to the economy as a result of COVID-19. And because of that, we have had a very close look at the 5-year financial plan. We've revisited all expenditures, all budgets in all departments and service areas, and we've had a very close look at property taxation. So I'd like to start today's presentation with talking about more of the context about how we proceeded with the financial planning process after finding out that what COVID-19, what the financial impact would be to the municipality. So we had a look at what our significant risks and impacts would be as a result of COVID-19, what immediate measures we needed to put in place to react to the impact that occurred, and the financial objectives and priorities that we set out in order to continue on with the financial planning process. We realized that we needed to continue on with the process under a very different approach, and we had to set out a list of objectives and priorities in order to do that effectively. So I'll go over those. And then I'll talk about some financial tools and strategies that we have available to us to minimize the risks that are facing us at the current time. So currently we're seeing quite a bit of risk to our revenues and our cash flows. So I want to spend a bit of time talking about that. So our risk to revenues are a result of not being able to provide some of the services that we would traditionally provide and then collect fees for. So as a result, we are seeing a reduction to revenues. We're seeing a reduction in the demand for district services that we will continue to provide. And as a result, we'll see a reduction in revenues. and we will also have a reduction in the user's ability to pay, which is impacting the demand on the services that we provide. As a result of reduction to revenues, and even with the revenues that we do have the ability to collect, we are seeing a risk to our cash flows. We expect to see a delay in our receivables, particularly with respect to utilities and taxation, which we require in order to provide the services and pay for the operating expenditures. We've had to refund user fees that have been collected to date in 2020 for services that we were not able to provide as a result of COVID-19 and the restrictions that were put in place. We have low operating financial stability and cash reserves. We do have some, and I'll talk about later in the presentation about how we were able to access some of those reserves to minimize the risk to the taxpayer. We have had high capital expenditures in 2019, and we expect to see that going forward for 2020 and 2021. And that's mostly as a result of our two large capital projects that we have on the go, which is the multi-use path extension and the wastewater treatment plant. So with high capital expenditures, even though the funding sources are for the most part secured and stable with grant funds, we are required to expend most of those funds and then receive the grant funds after the fact. So I want to take a moment to talk about the immediate financial measures that we put in place in order to minimize the risk to our cash flows and revenues immediately. There are some measures that we are considering in the future, but these are ones that we had to react to immediately. We had to cancel recreation programming, refunding user fees, as I just mentioned, for any future programming and existing programs, and then we had to reduce the service levels in that area. We are currently working on a new approach for offering recreation programming with the restrictions that have been put in place. We have had to close the Community Children's Center, which will remain closed, and the budget allows for a September 2020 opening. We felt it was appropriate to close the center due to risk to employees, as well as we were seeing a reduction in attendance with families taking or reducing their enrollment due to the risk in the center. We have suspended the hiring of all temporary and seasonal employees in 2020, with the exception of one temporary position in Public Works. We are closely monitoring service delivery, service demand, and user fee collection. We've delayed the hiring of most positions to late 2020 and into 2021. And we've transferred, and we will be proposing in today's financial plan, so we actually haven't transferred yet, but we're proposing a transfer of $150,000 from general surplus funds to the Financial Stability Reserve Fund. I'll talk more about that Financial Stability Reserve Fund later on in the presentation and how it helped us stabilize revenues for 2020. We have reduced expenditures in all service areas, and we are continuing to do weekly cash flow projections to make sure that the risk to our cash flows is monitored and minimized where it can be. So the objectives and priorities that we set out in order to prepare a financial plan that we felt was feasible and manageable for the taxpayer while continuing to offer essential services are the following. So we needed to make sure that we meet the current service delivery demands of the community. While some aspects of services in the community have been restricted or have closed, we are required to continue to provide services and meet the demands that the community is asking for. We need to establish appropriate services and service levels, and we need to make sure that the taxation levels are reasonable. Essential services have to continue and need to be appropriately funded. So if we're seeing a risk to revenue, we need to look at other sources of funds in order to continue to provide these essential services. And we've done just that in our financial plan, and I'll talk about that more later. Essential projects must continue and need to be appropriately funded. We are in the fortunate position of having stable funding sources for the majority of our projects. Where projects were not funded by stable revenue sources and heavily relied on taxation or user fee revenue, we decided to defer those projects. Non-essential projects and services, as I just mentioned, have been deferred, and immediate cash flow needs are being met. We need to continue to develop plans and policies that will generate and ensure stable future revenues and cash flows. We have to create a 5-year plan that will support a resilient, efficient, and reliable municipality, and balance that with a plan that considers the fiscal health of the taxpayers and the community at large. We must continue to maintain transparency to the community and create a plan that responds to the current economic climate of the community while maintaining essential services. So as I mentioned a moment ago, there are several financial tools and strategies that we do have in place to ensure that we meet our cash flow needs and we minimize our risk to revenues. So one such tool is a revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw, which Council recently adopted and established $5 million in short-term credit to meet our immediate cash flow needs in anticipation of current year taxation revenue. We have to continue to meet our operating expenditures to ensure we can provide the essential services we need to provide. And then we need to meet our transfers to other agencies that we collect taxation on behalf. So that is, for example, school tax, regional district taxes, which are often due July or August, and I'll talk about those more in a moment. We have to encourage timely payment of utilities and taxes, and some ways that we will be doing that is we will be accepting credit card payment for 2020 taxes, and there's more information coming out regarding that with the taxpayers' tax bill. Those will be subject to an administration fee. We will be reducing taxes to what we feel is an appropriate and feasible level, and I will talk about ways in which we did that in a moment. We've adjusted tax due dates and penalty timing, and we've extended the due date for Q1 utility bills to 90 days. We are continuing to focus on plans and policies that will stabilize future revenues and will help us manage our risk. So during this time, we received significant correspondence from the Ministry and the Municipal Finance Authority, and I just want to take a moment to talk about the advice that they are providing to local governments with respect to finance. They've asked us to focus on our budget and tax cycle, and that's certainly what we have been doing over the last 4 weeks. We need to ensure a strong cash position, which we are monitoring very closely, and I feel confident that we are. We need to keep liquid investments in portfolios. Due to our lower reserve fund levels, we have not invested long term, so I can assure everyone that our investments are currently liquid. We need to continue to practice good financial management and stay the course. We must prioritize core municipal operations and use the legislative tools that are in place and available to us, such as the revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw. And they're asking that we defer expenses related to non-essential services and capital projects. Further to the correspondence, the province has provided some financial support to commercial properties and to local governments during this difficult time. I'd like to just take a moment and go over what that support entails. So there has been a reduction to the school tax rate for commercial properties, and that relief has been directed to classes 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So for us, that excludes class 1 and class 2. Those are the other 2 classes that the District of Tofino has assessed properties in. So that's the residential class and the utilities class. The province has postponed late payment penalties on commercial properties, so the classes I just mentioned, to October 1st, and the due date will remain on as July 2nd, 2020. I will talk about later on in the presentation what the penalty date and due dates will be for other properties. They've delayed the remittance of school tax and police tax to December 31st. Typically, the majority of that remittance is due in July, with the balance coming in or being remitted as we collect taxes throughout the year. They've delayed that remittance to December 31st, allowing us to use those cash flows to meet our obligations to transfer levies to the other agencies that we collect on behalf and to meet our cash flow needs. We are being allowed to borrow from our capital reserves interest-free for the year 2020 only. We will have the discretionary authority to delay tax sale. I have not, I don't have a recommendation on that today, and I'm not sure what we will do in that regard, but I will provide some information to council on that at a later date. We received an extension to revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw. Usually that needs to be paid by the end of the calendar year. Now we have till the end of the calendar year 2021. And the deadline has been extended for annual reporting requirements. Deadlines will not be enforced for the submission of our audited financial statements. This is a good opportunity for me to say to council that our audit is complete, and I have reviewed draft financial statements, and we will be sending those to the audit committee within the next few weeks. Canada Summer Jobs grants have increased the amount that they typically give to us to the minimum hourly wage. So this may be an opportunity to add back summer students in the area of parks and in the area of recreation. Prior to COVID-19, we did apply for these grants, and so typically it will cost about $7,000 per student. We're estimating it'll cost between $2,500 and $3,000 depending on the student and the timing for each of these positions. So I want to talk about the financial support that we provide to other organizations that continue to be in the financial plan that is being proposed to council today. So we provide $20,000 each year to the Chamber of Commerce under a fee-for-services agreement. We offer permissive tax exemptions to several applicants, and those are already in place for 2020. We will be going through the policy and bringing an amendment to council based on a previous presentation to council earlier this year. And applications or requests for applications will be going out shortly for the 2021 taxation year. 2020 Arts and Culture and Council grants, those remain in the budgets. All applicants have been contacted, and most applicants feel as though they can modify their proposals based on the restrictions that are currently in place. Only one project has been cancelled, and so those applications will come forward to council after the financial plan is adopted. The municipal and regional district tax and online accommodation providers tax that we transfer over to the Tofino Housing Corporation and Tourism Tofino will continue to happen this year. We are expecting a reduction in both of those areas. Both our organizations are working on reviewing budgets and cash flows as a result of that impact. For the Tofino Housing Corporation, we offer a loan guarantee. It's in place for 5 years. It started in the middle of July, so we tax for half of that guarantee in 2019. We're taxing a full year, $70,756, and that'll expire in July of 2024, if not earlier. So I'm going to move into an update on the 2020 budget specifically, and then I'll expand it out to the 5 years of the financial plan. So since the January 31st budget meeting, the financial plan and the 2020 budget has changed significantly. We've made reductions in revenues based on the current demand. Typically, our taxation revenue and own source revenue, our user fee revenue, is about the same each year for the base amount of taxation. And we are going to see a reduction in user fee revenue, which will mean in order to meet the fixed costs that we have in the different service areas, we will need to rely a bit more heavily on taxation. That doesn't mean there is a tax increase. I'll go over what that impact is in a moment when we have a look at the consolidated 2020 budget. We've reduced operating expenses to meet current service levels, and we've reduced travel in all areas due to restrictions in place, council travel and indemnities, including staff travel and training budgets. So we are only requiring training for those staff that are required to meet their professional development requirements under their certification. We have reduced service levels, as I mentioned earlier, which has reduced costs or reduced expenditures, and we've canceled projects that relied on taxation and weren't required to be completed this year. We've also deferred projects to future years of the financial plan. So in the agenda package today, I did provide a consolidated project listing for all 5 years of the plan. And I don't plan on going over that today, but I will, after I go through these projects that have been removed from the financial plan, just pause for a moment and see if council has any questions regarding those projects. So since the last budget meeting, and perhaps a couple of these were removed prior to the January 31st budget meeting, but this is a collective list of what has been removed from the financial plan since the first time we presented it to council. The community hall kitchen upgrades have been removed from the 5-year plan entirely, as well as the indoor recreation facility. Council is aware that the grant was not approved for the facility, and since that time we have removed it from the 5-year plan, and the debt servicing has been removed from taxation. The duty officer vehicle for the fire department has been removed. And at the January 31st meeting, the project for opening West Gibson Street between 1st and 3rd was under review, and it was not added back to the financial plan. Community hall roof improvements were removed, and we replaced that with a condition assessment excuse me, of the building instead. And the structural mitigation project was fully grant dependent, and that was removed from the budget as well.
Nyla, is this a point where you invite questions or comments?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. One comment I had was I noted that when the federal government announced that they are putting their minds to stimulus funding, one of the infrastructure stimulus funding ideas that was cited in the press release was around projects that could be, you know, a little smaller in scope, but things exactly like community hall upgrades. And so if there's an opportunity to apply for that kind of funding, especially if it's, you know, like 90% or 100% funding for small communities, will we still be in a position to take advantage of that so we could complete that work if it had, you know, little to no impact on taxation?
Yeah, the decision to remove the community hall upgrades and replace it with a condition assessment is that we were seeing a lot of areas of the hall that would perhaps require improvement. So we just wanted to take a step back, do a condition assessment, and then make a plan similar to what we did with the MUP assessment, and move forward in a productive way.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay, so I'll get into the numbers now on the 2020 budget. The capital and infrastructure levy has been reduced from a taxation perspective to 0, but we are contributing 10% of what we proposed to collect for the capital and infrastructure levy, which was just over $1.37 million, to reserve funds. So we are fully funding that from general surplus. So there won't be any taxation from the capital and infrastructure levy in 2020. We're doing a 0% 2020 general tax increase, and that's to the base amount of taxation that we typically apply to keep up with rising costs from year to year. Non-market change revenue was added to the 2020 tax levy in the amount of $23,300. That amount fluctuates from year to year. It could sometimes be negative, it can sometimes be positive, and that relates to taxation revenue on improvements to property. So if there is a vacant land and the land had improvements in the following year, the taxation on that property due to the increase in assessed value makes up non-market change. Debt servicing is being taxed at $282,641 this year, and that is related to wastewater treatment plant interest only on the construction phase of the project, long-term debt for reservoir as well as staff housing, and then the THC loan guarantee, which I mentioned a moment ago. So the general fund contingency is set higher than in previous years at just over $400,000. So a typical contingency is about $135,000. Last year we did require more contingency than that. A higher contingency is going to allow us for more operational flexibility. I think it's extremely important this year, given the volatility of the economy, as well as what will be expected of municipalities with respect to changing service levels, changes in the types of service we may perhaps provide, and the emergent expenditures that will be coming up likely over 2020 and 2021 related to responding to COVID-19 or in the recovery phase. Some expenditures, most expenditures we are finding are recoverable through EMBC, but some expenditures are not, and we need to be prepared to meet those demands should they arise. Any balances that we don't spend in the year will be transferred to operational or capital reserves. So if we do see a surplus this year and it is related to contingency, those will likely come back to council with a recommendation to be transferred in the same manner as perhaps capital and infrastructure levy funds are transferred to reserves. In the water fund, we have the ability to use 2018 and 2019 surplus to add to 2020 operations. So we're in a position where we're going to see a significant reduction to user fees in the water and the sewer utility. And what that would typically mean if we saw a risk to revenues in that area is we would need to revisit our fees. And we simply cannot do that this year. So to make sure that we reduce the impact to the user, we have decided to use prior year surpluses to add to operations and freeze all utility rates for the 2020 calendar year. So we are planning for a rate increase in January 1st of 2021. But for this year, we've added $300,000 in surplus to the operating budget. And we've set the water contingency at about $94,000. We've also contributed from the Financial Stability Reserve Fund in the amount of $60,000. So that Stability Reserve Fund was set up a couple years ago to minimize the risk during circumstances just like this one. So if we are experiencing an emergency and we need to make sure that we stabilize our revenues, we would draw from that reserve fund to minimize the impact to the taxpayer or the user. And we've done just that with those funds this year. In the sewer fund, we had slightly higher surpluses of about $500,000 over 2 years. And typically, I should have mentioned this a moment ago, we would transfer those surplus funds into capital reserves for the improvement of sewer and water infrastructure in the future. We usually do that the year after the surplus occurs, so we had the ability to not transfer those 2018 funds and use that for operations this year. And that's how we were able to stabilize the rates in the water and the sewer fund. So the sewer contingency is set at just over $300,000. And again, we will be looking at a rate increase for January 1st of 2021. The contingencies I just want to mention in both the water and the sewer fund are being set at a higher value than previous years. And the reason for that is we had to make significant assumptions with respect to how much we felt revenue would decrease by. So we are estimating about a 35% decline in water or utility fees. And that may seem not low enough or not high enough of a reduction, but we do charge a base or a fixed fee on the utility bills for the sewer and water. And so that's given us the ability to stabilize revenues during a time like this, but also put some assumptions in place to consider what the reduction would be. So if we are not correct with those assumptions, the contingency will be available to us to apply to operations if we see further decreases. So the budget we presented in January, as I mentioned, looks quite different than the budget we'll see today, and I'll bring up the consolidated by 2020 budget in a moment. But we've reduced expenditures by close to $1.8 million since the January 31st meeting. Most projects remain in the budget due to stable funding sources. So we have significant grant funds and reserve funds that we are applying to some of our larger capital projects. Water and sewer fees, we're expecting a reduction of $517,000, and we're seeing a reduction to user fees in the amount of just $403,000. We've reassigned 2019 taxation in the amount of $122,423, and those are for projects that we would have taxed for in 2019 that are continuing on into the 2020 year. So I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen and show the consolidated worksheet. Okay, so I just want to go over this blue section here, which are the total expenditures for the year. So the total expenditures we're seeing is in this bottom cell here of 40,533,604. So of that, 75%, 30.7 million relates to capital expenditures. And so those are, the majority of that is our large capital project of the wastewater treatment plant, which we expect to construct later this year or begin construction. 18% is related to operations and 6% are transfers. And so those would be transfers out to other agencies or transfer to reserve funds in the year. So moving over to revenues. The taxation of the total taxation for general services is 8% of the total budget. So that's 3,396,691. And those are divided between several service areas, as you can see on this side in the general fund, administration, council, bylaw, all the way down to public spaces. And then the water and sewer fund, we don't apply any taxation to those funds for general services. What we do tax for, and so the taxation is in this column here in 8%, and 1% over here for debt servicing at 282,641. And that is split across 3 areas. One is in administration to service the staff housing debt as well as the Tofino Housing Corporation debt. And then in the water fund, we have a reservoir that we are paying a long-term debt related to a reservoir for 51,890. And this 139 relates to interest on the wastewater treatment plant. 17% of revenues is coming from borrowing, and that is the amount we expect to borrow to assist us with construction or beginning to construct the wastewater treatment plant. During the time of construction, we are only required to pay interest only, and that's what we are collecting here for 139,000 to repay the interest on what we temporarily borrow during construction. And the last thing I'd like to highlight here is this other column under revenue is all of our own source revenue that we collect for different fees under the various service areas. So down below here, you can see in the water and the sewer fund, this is what we expect to collect from utility fees in the year, and the amounts above relate to various services that we offer. So typically the percentage in this column will be about the same as a percentage in the taxation column. We are seeing a reduction in user fees this year, as I mentioned a moment ago. So the percentage of total revenue is 5% coming from user fees, and then a higher percentage at 8% from taxation. So while we are not increasing taxation, we've had to rely a bit more heavily on taxation for general services to meet our fixed costs because we have less revenue coming in from our own sources at this time. So I will pause there. Those are all the comments I have on the consolidated budget to see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Nyla. Any questions? Nope, looks good. Thank you. Oh,
Sorry, I was trying to get to my unmute button. I actually do have a question just about the water increase being scheduled for January 1st, 2021. Is there a particular legislative reason why we have to pick that day? I'm just thinking of when our community has the most money or the most flexibility, and generally the off season is not one of it. So I was just wondering if there's any flexibility in those days, or how we navigate that, or if it's legislated to be that way.
Sure. It's not legislated. However, we budget on a calendar year, and because to avoid a large bump or increase in, say, Q3 or Q4 or partway through the year, our preference is to spread an increase out over a calendar year in order to meet our budget requirements. However, right now we're looking at a date of January 1st. If we find that we're going through the year and contingencies and those surplus funds we've transferred into the water and sewer utility are not required, we will have the ability to transfer those again into 2021. and minimize, again, the impact to the user. So right now we're proposing a January 1st date. That's likely going to be modified and changed as we get through this budget year and enter into the next budget cycle.
Awesome, thank you. It was just something that I'm trying to be mindful of. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Nyla.
Okay, I'll just take a moment and go back to the presentation. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to talking about property taxation over the 5 years of the financial plan, and then I'll focus more closely on 2020 taxation, going over the tax rates for this year. So total 2020 municipal property taxation over 2019 has reduced by $887,179. So that's not the amount, I'm sorry, one moment. That's not the amount that it has reduced based on what we proposed to tax, but that's the taxation amount that it has reduced over what we collected in 2019. So we were able to reduce taxation by removing the C&I levy from taxation for 2020, and we are not imposing a tax increase for general taxation this year. Over the 5 years, we've removed the debt servicing for the indoor recreation facility. So while we saw an increase in the proposed plan presented on January 31st in about year 3 of the financial plan, that has since been removed, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. Capital and infrastructure levy amounts have been modified for years 2021 to 2023. And the 2% increase as it stands now is included in the 2021 to 2024 budgets, but that will be revisited throughout the upcoming budget process. And we will closely monitor economic environment to make sure that a 2% increase is required, making sure that our service level and service demands require a 2% increase before we move forward with the 2021 budget. So I want to take a moment to talk about the capital and infrastructure levy. So there's 3 colors in here, and the blue amounts relate to what we will tax in each year of the plan with respect to the capital and infrastructure levy. The red amount is our ability to apply previous year's surpluses to minimize the impact to the taxpayer over the earlier years of the plan. And the green amounts relate to the reduction in the levy. So before I go into that, I just want to talk a little bit about how the infrastructure levy amount was developed. The levy is collected each year, and it was determined by the district's asset management investment plan. And so an investment plan is looked at over a long period of time to ensure that we have the funds to replace infrastructure in 5 years or 10 years or in 30 years, a major piece of infrastructure. So what that means is we are investing over the long term in order to replace at any point in time in the future. When we calculate that amount, we incorporate a level of risk, and the level of risk allows us to take advantage of any grant opportunities that may arise. As debt servicing amounts open up after we've repaid the wastewater treatment plant, it's going to allow us to borrow if we need to for major pieces of infrastructure in the future. And then we may have the ability as well to use, we will have the ability to use reserve funds, which is the purpose of us collecting this amount. So because of that risk factor, and then there is a general risk factor worked into the calculation, it prepares us for times like these that we're in right now, where we need to consider the impact to the taxpayer, and our reduction in our ability to tax and the taxpayer's ability to pay has been reduced. So we need to, and in consideration of all of that, have a look at what that levy could look like over the next 5 years. And so I've proposed a plan today to minimize the impact to the taxpayer, consider the economic impact that COVID-19 has had on taxpayers, and slowly work our way back up to that optimal level of investment where we previously wanted to get to by 2023. I'm proposing we push that out another year to 2024 and also minimize the amount that we're collecting over the 5 years, over the next 5 years. So in 2020, as I mentioned a moment ago, we are reducing the levy significantly by 90%. So where we were going to collect about 1.37 million, we're only going to transfer 137,178 into reserve. So that's 10% of what we planned. And the long-term investment calculation that we have and the level of risk we've worked into the model is allowing us to do this without significantly impacting the long-term investment in our reserve funds. In year 2021, I'm proposing that we reduce the levy by half, so reduce it by 775 to 18. And what we will be transferring into reserves, tax 50% of that at 387,609 and use surplus funds to apply to the balance, and then transfer 775 to 18 to reserves. In 2022, we build up the amount that we are going to transfer into reserves, but still reduce it by 25% of what we proposed, and half will be contributed from general surplus, and half will be taxed at 648,410. In 2023, I'm proposing still a 25% reduction to the levy, and then a taxation amount of 1.43 million. In 2024, I have proposed that we go up to that optimal level of investment at 1.9 million. So this is a plan that I established on my own. I really look for council's feedback on it. It's a plan that I think meets the objectives and the priorities that we set out in our financial planning process in light of COVID-19 and the economic impact. I feel as though it balances the objectives well, while still meeting our investment needs into the levy and not impacting the long-term investment model that we've set out. So I think I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Nyla. Councillor Steer, is that you unmuting yourself?
Yes.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you, Nyla, so much. I had a question with just in the 2023 and that there was no surplus being utilized in that year. What is the rationale in the case for not using surplus in that year?
Yes, so we only have so much surplus available to us, and I think when I was having a look at this, I expect the most amount of economic impact to occur and hopefully taper off by year 2023, and that is just a guess at this point, and certainly we will be reviewing this and modifying it on an annual basis as we go through our budget process. So I wanted to apply what we had available to us in surplus funds in the earlier years of the plan, and reducing it as we move out. What we will be doing, though, is bringing forward to council the reserve and surplus policy, and I'm going to have a strong recommendation in that policy to apply any surpluses in the year to the infrastructure levy or to assist with debt servicing in order to reduce the impact to the taxpayer in the following year. So likely this is going to change if my recommendation is favorable to council. Likely this will look different from year to year as we develop new policies, as council considers new policies and surpluses are determined. Typically we do see surpluses each year, and that's as a result of budgeting conservatively with revenues, not knowing exactly how much we will collect in user fees, which reduces the demand required on taxation. And so as surpluses result from year to year, we have the ability to go in and minimize the impact to the taxpayer. And so that's what we've done here, is we've done it just in the earlier years of the plan. Certainly this can be modified and pushed out a little bit. I kind of recommend starting with this sort of general approach for the 5 years. We're going to enter into our next budgeting cycle pretty quickly here, and we'd have an opportunity to revise this and push this out a little bit as information becomes available. It's very difficult at this point in time to predict what the future is going to look like for anyone economically, particularly for us too, or for us as well. So I think with the information we have available, this is an approach that might be suitable, but in a year's time it might not be, and I'm happy to revisit that again.
Thank you, Nyla.
Anyone else? Okay, yes, Nyla, I think this is as reasonable as it can be, and it takes into account what we know today in 2020 and what we expect to see in 2021. And then we all know that as we move out into the future years, there's more and more uncertainty. And so the way that it kind of cost share, it reduces the C&I levy overall and then shows a gradual resumption of where we're going to be at. And as well shows I think a very reasonable way of using surplus and taxation, where cost sharing between the two as we get back up to 2023 levels there. It's as reasonable as it can be. And when we know more about the economy and how things resume or do not resume later this year and going into next year, we'll have the ability to revisit this. So I think you've done a great job of presenting a really rational model for the C&I levy. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, Councillor McQuaid, please.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I find your presentation really approachable and easy to understand, and overall, when you started with kind of the goal of being resilient, efficient, and reliable, I'd really, when we add nimble to this, I think that this is, as Councillor Osborne said, just such an incredible plan. The fact that I just want to reiterate what you said is that this is for this year, we have the ability to move and adapt for the rest of them. And I think that myself and the rest of the community is probably really, really happy to hear that this is where we are at now with the information that we have today. And I'm just so grateful that we have you leading us on this. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks everybody.
Okay, so putting that all together, all that information, what 2020 taxation is going to look like and what it looks like moving forward, I just wanted to provide an illustration of what that would look like and talk it through a little bit. So this is a graph that I bring to council each year, so I think everyone's used to seeing it. The blue amount represents general base rate taxation that typically increases 2% from year to year, and it also includes that non-market change value that we will know that we know this year is 23,000, and so that's included in that 22 or 2020 blue amount there. I've provided 2019 just for context to see that taxation has gone down over 2019, and that's attributed to eliminating the C&I levy for 2020 from taxation and funding 10% of it out of general surplus funds. So that amount is not reflected in here. It's just the expenses that are funded by taxation. So the green amount is quite small in the earlier years of the plan, and it relates to the wastewater treatment plant debt and any other debt servicing that we have. And we see that grow quite a bit in 2022. So we are working on modeling what the debt servicing is going to look like for the wastewater treatment plant. So we do have the ability to move some of that debt servicing out onto the utility bills, and so we're going to have a look at what that would look like and what the threshold for that is. We certainly could not take if $896,000 a year and move that onto utility bills, because the user would then see quite a significant impact in the utility bill. We are going to see operational expenses increase as well as the debt servicing amount. So we need to be aware of that and considerate of that when we think about how much we can move on to those utility bills. So over the next year or two in the financial planning process, more information is going to come out and what that could look like in year 2022. And then the demand loan on the top for the THC, that's the purple amount, quite small, but the guarantee falls away in the middle of 2024, if not sooner. So this is what the 2020 taxation calculation looks like. So we started with last year's amount of 3,373,398, and that's that blue amount, that base rate of taxation. And so the only increase to that base amount this year is related to non-market change of 23,300. So the amount that we are taxing for general services this year is 3,396,691. We've added to that debt servicing requirements for the wastewater treatment plant, interest only at 139,000. We collected 32,000 last year, and we're applying it to that amount this year to meet our interest requirements. And then the THC demand loan of 70,756 is there, and then some other debt servicing we have. And so total municipal taxes is 3,679,332. This is a comparison of assessment values last year versus this year. We saw almost $156 million in assessment value increases over the last year. That's about 14%. A small amount of that relates to non-market changes at 7 million. And so that relates to, for us, mainly changes in inventory where a vacant parcel will have a new construction on it, or another change will be if a large parcel was subdivided. So for comparison, I've provided the draft tax rates that I proposed to council in January, and what we've modified that to based on the changes in taxation. And so that I've also included the 2019 rate. So in all property classes, the rate has decreased over 2019 as a result to the changes that we've made to general taxation this year and reducing the levy to 0 from taxation. And so this is a proportion of property taxation by class. In the middle column, that's what it looked like in January. So we were proposing a taxation amount of $5,050,000. Now, as I showed a couple slides ago, the taxation amount is $3,679,332. And the proportion of taxes, the majority being collected in the residential class at $1,980,000 and the business class at $1,608,000. So this is comparison of tax bills over last year, and again, because this was the last information we saw was in January, I just wanted to show the change of what we were proposing and what we are proposing now. So in these two residential properties, they differ a little bit. One of them, in the Tibbs building, no assessment change, no improvements in the year, and last year's tax bill was not the total tax bill, this is municipal taxes only, was 1,144, and under our new proposed rates and revised budgets, we're expecting municipal taxes to be 809. So the one on the bottom differs a little bit. There were improvements in the year. The assessment value has changed significantly, so the municipal taxes are about the same as they were last year. These two residential properties will see a decrease as well. The top one, municipal taxes, was $2,594, going down to $1,957, and the bottom one is similar. It was $8,900, going down to just over $7,000 for municipal. I've also provided a couple resorts just as a sample. So last year, $150,000 in municipal taxes. This year, with these proposed rates, it's $122,813. And the bottom one has seen a reduction as well. And a couple of restaurants. Last year, municipal taxes was $16,051, and then that's being reduced to $12,464. And the bottom property is going to see a reduction as well. So I will show what total tax bills look like in a moment, but before I do that, I just wanted to go over the agency tax requisitions that we're seeing. So all of the agencies are increasing taxes this year over last year. In most cases, it's fairly minor. Where we are seeing the biggest change is with the regional district at 89,539, and then we're seeing some bigger adjustments and changes in the school tax, and that relates to what I talked about a moment ago with the provincial support to commercial property. So we're seeing a significant reduction in the non-residential classes of 583,548, but we are seeing an increase of about 200,000 in the residential class. And that increase is quite a bit higher than what we've seen in previous years. In previous years, 2019, there was an $86,000 increase. In 2018, there was a $26,000 increase. And then we saw a reduction in 2017 over 2016. And school or police tax is going up by 42,000. So this is what total property taxes look like by agency based on dollar amounts, not based on proportions on the tax bill. It's going to differ quite a bit from the residential class to the business class, for example, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. But just over half of the taxes that are being levied this year are municipal taxes. 25% relates to school tax, and then the other amounts are smaller from the other agencies. Regional district is that orange amount there, and it goes down from there. So the proportion in the residential class versus commercial class is going to look quite different this year, and that's because of the reduction in the school tax amount in that commercial class and the business classes. So in the commercial class, the proportion of municipal taxes is going to be higher because the school tax is reduced, and then compared to the residential class, where the proportion of municipal taxes is 45%, 33% of school tax, and then 10% regional district. So these are some quick calculations on a couple of residential properties, and I have a couple commercial properties as well. So these are the two commercial or residential properties I provided a moment ago. The total tax bill will decrease on the top one because the assessment value has remained the same. The one down below, there will be an increase this year because you can see that the assessment value has increased significantly more than the average due to improvements on the property. So that tax bill will increase. On these two properties, I've provided one restaurant and one resort for commercial. On the top property, the tax bill was $27,414 last year, and that'll be decreasing to $19,558. And the bottom one will be decreasing as well. Last year was $210,000. It's going down to $149,000. So property tax due dates. Last week on April 14th, there was a special council meeting where staff was authorized to prepare a draft bylaw to establish an alternative tax collection scheme from the general scheme that we normally follow. So we have the ability under the community charter to modify our due dates and our tax penalty dates. And so we do plan to do that for the 2020 taxation year. So to line up with what the province will be putting in place for commercial properties, we're going to do the same thing for residential as well as for utilities classes, which are the other two classes that we have assessment values in. So we will be opposing a tax due date of July 2nd with a late payment penalty of 0% after that due date, and 10% on October 1st. And there may be some questions as to why we are setting a July 2nd due date. I started the presentation with talking about our risk to cash flows, and so the tax collection scheme that we put in place has to consider that risk to cash flows. By setting a July 2nd due date, we have the ability to collect property taxes from taxpayers who pay through their mortgages through their banks. The banks will follow the due date, in which case we will get those tax amounts. And through the provincial tax deferral program, which I'll go more into in a moment, we will receive those amounts from the province for properties that do defer their taxes. So that will help reduce our risk to cash flows that we'll see partway through the year, and encourage early payment for those taxpayers that can pay to try and pay by that July 2nd due date. So as I mentioned, there is an opportunity for taxpayers to defer their taxes through a provincial property tax deferment program. So essentially this program provides low interest loans to qualified BC homeowners to pay taxes on their principal residences only. So this does not apply to commercial properties. It does not apply to investment properties, only for principal residences. So similar to the declarations that need to be made for the homeowner grant, the homeowner would be required to declare that this is their principal residence and answer a couple questions. And there are two options for the tax deferment program, one for seniors, surviving spouses, or persons with disabilities, for seniors at ages 55 and over. And then there's also a deferment program available for families with children. And I think that this is a program that's not as well known. So we have a designated district contact for taxpayers to phone, and that has been included in communications to date, and we'll continue to communicate on that and be available to answer any questions at the district level regarding property tax deferment. This program is through the province and needs to be applied for through the province, but we will be providing some guidance on how to do this and where to go to get the correct information.
Thanks, Nyla. I just want to jump in and say that I was told on a phone call with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing that the province thinks about 70% of residential households in British Columbia would fit the criteria of these programs, and that 30% of households would not. And we don't know, of course, what that is in Tofino, but to say that these programs are quite extensive in their coverage of British Columbian households. So that is good news for those who need it.
Yeah, the interest rate on the senior surviving spouses and principals or persons with disabilities program is slightly lower than the one for families with children, and the equity requirements differ under each program. You have to have a certain amount of equity in your home to apply for it. So those are the types of things we can answer for you at the district level and help walk you through the eligibility requirements.
Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes my presentation today on the financial plan. Just regarding next steps, we will continue to communicate on the various aspects of the 2020 budget and the the 5-year financial plan. We are going to begin preparing our 2020 tax guide to lay out the information so it's clear to the taxpayers, and then send that out with the tax notices. We are preparing our bylaws for consideration based on today's presentation, the information that's included in the 5-year proposed plan today at the May 12th meeting. We were recently given the ability to give all 3 readings and adoption to a bylaw at 1 meeting, and we do plan to recommend that at that May 12th regular council meeting. So I'm happy now to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, and what a tremendous amount of work has been done. So thank you to you and all the managers and your staff, Nyla, for all of the preparation that it took to get us to today. It must feel a little bit like just having to redo everything, because we were so close before, and now there was a massive reset button. But I want to ask members of council, do you have any questions or comments? Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I just want to echo the mayor's comments. That was a lot of work, and I want to acknowledge that and thank you, Nyla.
Thanks.
Councillor Law.
I just want to thank you, Nyla, for your conservative approach in the last many years. I think it's come to fruition, and we can see the benefits of that. being applied here. So I just really, thanks for that, and thanks for carrying it forward. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councillor Steer.
Yeah, thank you, Nyla, of course, and I'm just going to echo the sentiments and fully support the approach you're taking on this in the short and the long-term approach, and making it a program that we'll be able to make adjustments on in the future. And so thank you very much, and 100% support your approach.
Great.
Anyone else? Okay. I think what you would be looking for then is a motion to authorize staff to prepare the tax rates bylaw and the financial plan bylaw. Is that correct?
Yes, and I apologize for not preparing that in advance.
Okay, I think I know it. Councillor McMaster?
Comment.
Councillor
First,
McMaster, we
going
can't
back to the property tax due dates.
You're freezing up a little bit. If you turn off your video and just use your voice, I think we might be able to hear you better. If he can hear us. Is he frozen on everybody else's screen as well?
Yes.
Okay, lots of nodding heads there. Hopefully he'll come back. We know it was something about the...
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Oh.
Okay. So now his video is off, and if he unmutes himself, if he can hear us, then I think we'll be able to hear his voice. Okay, go ahead, Councillor McMaster.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear?
No, if you can hear us, we really can't hear you. You're coming in and out. We don't have a chat function, I don't think, on the way this is set up. Okay, unfortunately, we can't hear Councillor McMaster, so I'm not too sure if we know what his question is. And maybe he will hop off and come back on. I don't think it's going to prevent us from moving ahead, though, with the preparation of the tax rates bylaw, a motion to authorize the preparation of the tax rates bylaw and the 2020 to 2024 financial plan bylaw. So that's okay to lump those two together in one motion?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so then I'll go ahead and make the motion that we council authorize staff to prepare the 2020 tax rates bylaw and the 2020 to 2024 financial plan bylaw for the May 12th meeting.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Any final comments or questions? And we'll definitely get Councillor McMaster back in touch with Nyla and the rest of us for any questions he had. All right, then I will call the question. All in favor? Thank you. That's everybody present, and the motion is carried. Okay. I think that's it for today, isn't it?
I think so.
Okay. Well, it didn't take as long as we thought it might.
No.
Any closing comments from anybody? No. Okay. All right. In that case, a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion.
Second.
All right. Moved and seconded to adjourn, and all in favor? Thank you. The motion is carried and we're adjourned. So thank you, everybody, and thank you to our audience and everybody for watching today. You can look for more information from the District of Tofino about how this will all play out. And of course, at our next council meeting, we'll be considering the bylaws themselves. So thank you.